We've done quite a bit of work on the shadow structure, which is this structure right here. We've done enough work that we can begin to test to see whether it's actually going to work when we move our data over to the SVG. So we have the ability of having keys of every one of our structures. Now right now we only have rectangles kind of working in the structure, but we've done enough. What I want to do now is start testing to make sure that the philosophy is going to work, because we're trying a different philosophy. So again, I want to write my stub, so I'm going to just make this a little bigger. So inside of drawing, remember we have these couple methods. We have next key, we have create rectangle, we have a get shape. The next thing we want to do is I'm going to actually write a method here called draw. What the whole idea of the draw is going to be is to return an SVG, and I'm just going to return nothing right now. But what the whole idea is to have this guy return an SVG, a scalable vector graphics, of the structures that it has inside of it. So we've created our stub. Just save the stub. And now we want to write our test. So what I'm going to say is const the SVG is equal to, we called it panel dot draw, and there it is right there. And because we have two items in here, what I want to do is I want to expect, and again, we're going to go back to our DOM days. We're going to go and we're going to expect the SVG dot children dot length. And right now, how many items should be in it? We've added 2 rectangles. So that's what we want, is we want that to be 2. Now again, we're going to run this, and again, we know the test is going to fail, and we know why the test is going to fail. So we're going to do just the minimum amount of work that we have to get that to work. And it's going to actually say that length is not a property of this. So let's just fix the errors one at a time. So I'm going to go back into shapes now, and instead of returning this, we're going to go back to our index.js. I can't remember the statement, and we're going to just copy this statement right here. What that's doing is it's creating an element. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to shapes. We're going to actually create, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to create an SVG. And instead of creating a rectangle, we're going to create an SVG. And we're going to return the SVG. So that should get us past the next error. So hopefully at the end of this, it'll know what the length is. It'll know it's, or children, it will know about children. And let's look at it. Great. So we've made some great progress, because now we have an SVG. It has a children attribute, but what it's saying is there's actually no children in it. So cool. All right, let's go to the next step now. The next step in the draw is let's loop through the structure. Let's loop through this structure right here. We're going to loop through the shape structure. And again, the shape structure is an object, so we loop through that slightly different. And so the way I like to go through this one is for let shapes, or let's say keys, because it's going to go through the keys in this dot shapes. And for right now, all we're going to do is we're just going to print it. And we'll just let key. It shouldn't be plural, it should just be a key. For let key in this dot shapes. That should be right. Right, that's an in. So what this is going to do is it's going to loop through that object. It's going to grab all the keys, and it's just going to present them to us. So I think that should be what we need. So this, again, the tests are not going to pass, but what it's going to do is go to the next step which it'll loop through the two shapes that are in there. So we should see two console logs if it's working the way we want. And yeah, look at that, key 4 and key 5. So that's great. So the next step I want to do is I want to tell the shape to append itself to it. So I'm going to say, let's just go const element is equal to, and it's going to be this dot shapes, and we could call it draw, let's call it get element, this dot shapes dot, and we want to go to the key that we got, and we want to run a get element to there. And what this is going to do is it's going to ask the shape to get the actual DOM element for itself. And again, that hasn't been written. So when we go to run the test, I just want to make sure that hasn't been written yet. So what we're going to do is it will fail on that. It says, yeah, get element isn't coded. So what I'm going to do, and we're going to do this in the circle, or sorry, in the rectangle. So inside a rectangle, we're going to write a method here called get element. All right, and that should at least stop the error. So there's our get element. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually take this guy. If we back up and look at the errors, yes, 2B. So now we're back to that error again. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this guy and we're going to have to copy that line of code, this guy right here. The rectangle. So we're going to create that rectangle. We're going to create a shape. Didn't work like it's supposed to. Sorry about that. Right there. Paste it right there. And it's not an SVG we want to create. We want to create a rectangle. This is going to be a rectangle. Right, that's what we copied from the other one. All right, and then in the rectangle, we're going to set some attributes, but let's not set those attributes yet. So we're going to just save this. So well, we know we have to return it, so we might as well return rectangle. And we'll still be getting the same error, and the reason for that is I think it's going to be passing the element back properly, but it will not have passed it and added it to the array. So here we are in rectangle. We're going to go back to draw, and in draw, we created the element. Now what we're going to do is we're going to append it. So this, now we're going to svg dot append the element. And that should solve that problem. Again, it's still not going to work for a whole bunch of reasons. All right, so we got our test to pass. So at this point, we're going to do something a little silly. What we're going to do is we're going to take that SVG and we're actually going to append it to the browser in index.js just to see what happens. And at this point, nothing will happen, but I'll show you how we would debug it from this point. So we're going to go to the index.js, and if we're writing our code right, we'll be able to copy code back and forth between our test and our index. So what we're going to do here, and I don't know if you remember where we were, is I'm going to, when we click, I'm going to comment all this code out right now. We're going to actually want to delete it, but I just don't want to delete it quite yet because it's got some valuable information for us. And what we're going to do is I'm going to grab a few of the lines that we have in our code directly from our test. And in our test, the first thing we need to do is we need to create the panel. So we're going to create a panel. And again, we won't do any expects, of course. So in our index, just put that right there. No, actually, we want it outside of the click. So what we want to do is we want to create the drawing. And of course, when I save this, And let's actually have a look at our page so that we can do one line at a time. We're going to show that inside of Live Server, which will show up here. I'm going to just make this a little smaller so we can actually see both at the same time. We're going to turn on the console log so we can see it. So look at this. It says that shapes is not defined. So again, this is working right. We go into our test and we just copy code from our test, put it in our index right at the very top. I don't need this to say hello world anymore. And what's the next error we get? It says shapes not found. And there's a little bit of a bug in the browser, the way Node works versus the way the browser works. You have to put .js in it. Okay, great. So we have no errors, so at least we've got that. So what we've done is we've created a panel with some drawings. The next thing we're going to do is I need to put a couple shapes in there. So I'm going to go to the test, and how do I put a couple shapes in there? So I'm just going to create a rectangle. I'm going to copy these two lines, bring them into index, and all we're going to do is I don't need the expects, I just want to create it. All right, so let's see if that works. So again, in index, we're going to just create it, and because I'm not convinced that that's working, I'm just going to change the title to V3 and save it. Oh yeah, it is working. Okay, so now that doesn't seem to be working the way we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a log of panel just to see what's in it. Oh, and of course, we didn't add the panel to anything at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create above this guy right there, right above this, I'm going to create a div because I need somewhere to put it. And all I'm going to do in my div is give it an ID, and I'm going to call it ID. And again, I always start my IDs with ID, and I'm going to call it ID drawings. And so that's somewhere to put it. So I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to go ID drawings. And again, I would often print this out if anything is going to be wrong, and I'm going to append to it panel.draw. All right, so that's some funky stuff going on here. And so we can tell now it's actually created some shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to so I can tell what's happening here in this drawing, I'm going to add this class again so I can see a box around what it's done to see where we are. And again, everybody knows what's wrong right now, but I want to show you how you discover your way into what's wrong. So what we're doing is we're seeing an SVG here that's created a box around, and it's a box around the div, which is a little bit different than the SVG itself, but that's okay. That's at least showing us that we have a spot for it. Now, what we've done is I did a console log right here of the panel. So if we go now and we look at the panel, so we have a drawing with a width of 401 by 402, and that may in fact be this. And in there are shapes. So if we look at our shapes, we have a rectangle that has an X of 101, key 1. Oh, right, so that's our panel. So what we did is we just printed this guy right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy and see what the drawing is due. So those are our shadow objects, and our shadow objects look good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in again. I keep telling everybody don't use compound statements to start with. The const SVG is equal to, because that's what we want that guy passing us is an SVG. And I'm going to add the SVG in here, so I'm making this a less compound statement. And then I'm going to console log it. Okay. Now, here we are. Let's look at the SVG. There's the SVG. And look at that. We have two rectangles in it, but we don't, in fact, have any of the attributes set. So what we have to go back is set these attributes and see whether they'll work at all. And again, to set these attributes, I'm going to steal the code that we commented out here because this now shows us how to create them. So I'm going to just copy these attributes. And if you remember correctly, I did put the key in because we anticipated wanting to do that. So I'm just going to copy this into shapes. Before I do that, I need to write a test. Okay, so let's write our test. You guys just about caught me. I'm getting excited about getting stuff to show up on the screen. So when we do our draw, we've checked our lengths. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to expect the SVG dot children position 0 dot x, and I expect that to be, does everybody remember what that is? What should that be? So K4 is the first one we put out there, so that should be 101. 101, and the Y should be 102. All right. And we run our test, we run our tests. And the test fails. And it's expected to be 101, and it is not. It's actually undefined. So now I'm going to copy all of this code. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to copy all the code. And I'm going to put that into our shapes. And so when we actually go to draw that shape, I'm going to go back up to the rectangle. And now not only am I going to create a rectangle object, this isn't our rectangle, I'm going to actually set all the attributes. And I have to change this a little bit. All right, and I'm going to right click format this. Just get out of this guy because I need more space. Format it. Now, I now want the X to be, instead of 250, I want it to be this dot X. And now this one, the Y, I want it to be this dot Y. And in this little experiment, I'm going to just force the width and height. And the key now, I want to be this dot key. So let's save this guy. And we're getting some errors. So that's pretty cool. Oh, EL is not defined right, so it's rectangle. And again, it's a little bit of a problem. It should be my tests that's telling me that, but because the browser auto-reloading, the browser is actually running it. Oh my God, we did it. Look at this, you guys. Now again, unfortunately, live server ran, and it showed me that that actually worked. What I want to do is I actually want to run it through the test. Now, the message I want to get across here is we're using the tests to make sure our functionality is working properly, and then we check our browser right away to make sure what we're doing is actually going to work the way we think it does. Now we have a little bit of an error here, and let's see what the error is. It's still saying X is undefined. All right, let's debug this a little bit and find out what the problem actually is. Now, of course, the problem here is within the DOM attributes, we don't treat these like these are properties. They're actually attributes. So we actually have to do is get attribute, quote X quote. And what we want that to be is 101. And this one now also has to be a get attribute. And let's run that test to make sure that works the way we expect it to. An extra bracket here. All right, let's see what the error is now. Oh, look at that. That's interesting. Now, when we go to get the attributes, when it's actually in there, they're actually strings. And so for this, it's fine. We'll just check that it's a string. So yes, we got our tests to pass. All right, and there's one more attribute that we should be testing here. In this particular case, we should be testing the key to make sure get attribute key. And again, I don't know what it should be, so I'm just going to go K1. And run it, and it'll probably tell us it's K4 or K5. Yeah, it's probably K4, and that's fine. To be, oh, and it's undefined. We'll have to look and see why that's undefined. Let's have a look and see why. So let's go inside of shapes. This dot key. Oh, is that ever interesting? We're not actually setting the key anywhere. So we're not setting the key when we create it. So when we create a rectangle, we're not saving it. So now what we got to do is we got to go this dot key. No, we got to set it in the shapes. Yeah, this. Let's do it this way. Let's change this a bit. So what we're going to do is we get the key. We're going to actually pass the key to the rectangle when we're creating it. So here's your key, here's your X, and here's your Y. Let's save that. And we know it's going to break a bunch of tests because we're changing the interface, but that's cool. Let's fix these tests up. And then we're going to go back to, look at that. So now it's starting to break all the way down the line. So that's cool. So we go back up to rectangle. Okay. And when we set the rectangle, this is actually now going to be the key. And we're going to have this dot key equal to that. So we have a whole bunch of tests that we have to ripple back through to correct. And it's changing them all the way back. All right. So now when we create our shapes now, we're going to actually have to create our shapes right from the very back. So test drawing. Create a shape. So we're just going to pass it a key. We don't care. We set this rectangle. We're going to actually pass it a key. And let's update this test here. When we create a shape, and again, because this is a shadow object, we expect that to be okay. Okay. And this again is very common when we go to do our testing. We decide that we want our interface to change, and we update our interface. And again, if our tests are good, it'll help us lead us through all the things that we want to change. Okay, line 51. All right, and of course that is because when we created the shape, what's the error? K4. Right, we're back to K4. So this now is the original error that we got. So that's cool. Let's run it now. And all our tests, are they going to pass? Great. So we've done quite a bit here now. We've actually been able to get our objects into our DOM and get our DOM to work. So the next thing we're going to start doing is fooling around and checking to see whether we can get access to our attribute. So that was quite a bit. Congratulations.